Good morning, afternoon, and evening. Once again, it's a month later. Can you believe it? Time flies. And we're back with another episode 5 of our Digital Genius School, as you can see right above me. I'm hoping that everybody who's joined so far has really enjoyed what we've been doing, and today is no different to all the other episodes. We've got a jam-packed program for you with some fantastic experts. You saw them just in the little video. And we'll start off, I'll just give you a little hello. We'll start. Bookie, hello. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining.
Hi, Wolfgang. Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you for having me.
And then we've got Jeannie. Hi, Jeannie, joining us from the US.
Well, hello, actually in France, but yes, hello.
That's how much I know about my guests. I don't even know where they are. And then we've got Isla. Hi, Isla. Nice to meet you.
Hiya, nice to meet you all.
Fantastic. And finally, we've got Patrick. Patrick joining us as well.
Hi, guys. Good to be here.
And also, we've got Mark. Mark, as always, by my side. Hi, Mark.
Hi there. Welcome to the show again. Really excited for the conversation, as always, Wolfgang.
I think people are going to start thinking we're joined by the hip, the amount of time we're joined and come on things. Great. Look, guys, today is a wonderful episode, especially I was just saying to our panelists beforehand that this is really exciting for me. It's a really, really important topic that we're going to be talking about, special educational needs and disabilities, with a few other things included as well as we talk about them. But it's such an important topic in schools, and we've got a panel of experts here that I think are going to really help you and tell you and give you a bit of advice and talk about their experiences today. So to start off with, maybe we'll just get to know a little bit more about our guests. And Patrick, maybe we'll start with you, and you could just share a little bit with our audience about your experiences with special educational needs and disabilities, where you fit in and sort of where you've encountered, especially because, of course, we're talking about educational technology as well, where those two worlds have met in your world.
Yeah, well, fortunately, my specialism isn't around education technology. Working in education technology for about 15 years with schools all across the globe. The last 5 years, though, probably more relevant to the panel discussion and session we're having today. So I've been head of education strategy for a company called TextHelp. And TextHelp, of course, they support over 60 million students worldwide in terms of edtech support tools that can help all across teaching and learning, but principally across literacy and math support. So I suppose my specialist area there is looking at what does teaching and learning look like when we start to consider a little bit more about inclusive practice. How can that inclusive practice be supported and underpinned through edtech? And for me, my thing in terms of the pupils and students and teachers I would work with, principally around areas such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, ADHD. So specifically in and around those areas are where really my focus is in edtech, Wolfgang.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Patrick. I think gives also a really good, strong background as to how you'll fit into the discussion. And TextHelp, of course, is a wonderful company. I think probably known to most, if not all, of our users. Bookie, let us know how you fit into all of this.
Yeah, thanks. I've been teaching for years and now have been working in a special school, which is also alternative provision. And just to clarify for our audience members, alternative provision is the educational setting for students who are not in mainstream. So it could be PRUs, as you know, in my case, my school is a combination between a PRU and a special school. So with the young people there, we have all different types of, in terms of learning needs, but limited exposure, apart from the pandemic experience, to tech. And part of that is the fact that you've got young people who don't want to stand out in any particular way. So if I think back on my mainstream experiences where you've had, like different types of things, for example, Chromebooks, where we have speech to text, which have been predominantly used, or students who have additional things that, for example, the rest of the class might be writing and they may have their own keyboard-based devices. That's the type of thing that I've actually quite seen. My interest, I'm a curious teacher, and I'm always keen to look at ways that we can get students to engage with the learning. And so that if there's a learning need, I always make it my mission, irrespective of the setting I'm in, to find out what that learning need is, and just to explore the different ways in which we can use technology just to minimize the barriers and still enable them to access the learning. So I wouldn't classify myself an expert, but what I am great at doing is just looking at the various things out there and just trying them to have that open conversation to see what actually helps us young people to learn.
And I think that's wonderful, and I think that's sort of that whole inquisitive nature of working through what's best practice and what fits best, I think is really, really great. Before we move on to our next panelist, Patrick, you already have a fan, April Remfrey. Very excited to have you as a speaker at Senya in the fall. Wonderful, thank you, April. Nothing better than on St. Patrick's Day to have a fan on the show.
That's it.
Fabulous.
I should say, can I add, Wolfgang, happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody that is joining us today. I have to spread the Irish love around the world, obviously.
Absolutely. And just so everybody knows, I did try to get Guinnesses or pints of Guinness delivered to everyone. It just didn't work.
They managed to arrive underneath my desk, Wolfgang. So they are here. You just can't see them on camera. So
Brilliant. Fabulous. Isla, hi.
Hi.
How are you doing? And could you let us know a little bit more about how you fit in?
Yeah, so I'm an ESOL specialist. I'm an ESOL teacher. ESOL stands for English for Speakers of Other Languages. And I teach in an FE college in the UK. So that's really with 16 students that are sort of 16 plus and adults. As well as that, I'm a teaching and learning coach at my college. And I specialize in digital technologies. So I'm helping the staff there develop their digital skills so that they can help the students develop theirs. So I'm always fascinated by technology. I do lots of other things as well, like writing, and I'm interested in creating sort of technology enhanced resources for ESOL learners. But yeah, so I think there might be lots of people watching who sort of maybe in Senko roles. And I think more and more in the UK schools, if you're in Senko, you have the EAL students as well. So that I have a lot of expertise and knowledge about that. And some of the tools that I've been using, I think, are relevant to all learners, including SEND learners and ESOL learners.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I was saying beforehand how I think that actually really ties into today's discussion for us as well, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you and the role that you play. And yeah, Jeannie, I didn't mean to make you necessarily last, but just because I got your location wrong, I thought I'd let you hang out there for a little bit longer. How do you fit into all of this, Jeannie?
Yeah, so I started way back in, in the 1900s for teaching in special education. And then I became an administrator, and this was in California, in the United States. And really, I think that the way I fit in is, I've been an elementary school principal, I've been a director of special education and a director of student support services. And I think the way that I fit in is really that I've been able to help open the doors for diverse learners in many ways, including through technology, augmentative and assistive technology, communication tech kinds of technology, as well as low tech. And I have probably lots to say about the heart and the mind and relationships with families and teachers and students. And I think it's been touched on by the others as well. Just like trying to find what you can do to engage a student and propel their learning. So, and I have a lot of experience with more what we call functionally diverse, more severely handicapped kind of students around the use of technology. And I just believe in it. I think there's something we can do for almost every student, almost every learner.
Brilliant. Great, Jeannie. That's fantastic. And thank you all for sharing. We're going to kick things off with a little bit more, I think, dive into some detail and specifically talking about dyslexia as we know that all students are special and every student has needs in their own way. But as we're talking specifically today about certain different types of learning needs, dyslexia is one area that obviously is very prevalent. And And I'd like to know a little bit more from maybe we'll start with you, Mark, because you've been unusually quiet so far. So, you know, from your perspective, you know, what in dyslexia, could you share some best approaches and practices that you've experienced in your time working with schools and students?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I do feel kind of a little bit overwhelmed with the smorgasbord of awesome knowledge and experience here on the panel today. But certainly, like you were alluding to there, and Jeannie did too, every child is special. And so, you know, as a teacher, you always try and make sure that within your context, within your classroom, with those 30 children you've got in that particular lesson, you do what you can to ensure there's access and equity for all learners in the classroom. And if you're thinking about dyslexia, standard practice is just considering, again, every child will have their own, you know, individual plan, and you should know as their teacher what the best things are to support them with their particular needs. But some standard practice things that, you know, I've used throughout my career, and some of these are non-tech really, but just making sure that, you know, any resources are being that you created in a dyslexia-friendly font for them if you're sort of working in that kind of a way, making sure that you consider alternative coloured paper for helping them to actually read it. So white background is not necessarily the best choice. There are a whole bunch of different sort of dyslexia-friendly fonts out there. I'm sure Patrick will name a few. With my personal OCD graphic designer hat on for a second, Comic Sans is one which is popularly used for that purpose, but there are plenty of others that you can use. Comic Sans is a popular one. Often used by many platforms and it is easily accessible and stuff. But like you said, it's about being mindful of all the children in your classroom. More recently, we've seen some great tools from companies like TextHelp. What's been lovely for a long time is Microsoft do a great job of making a big song and dance about all of their accessibility tools recently, but Apple have had things like reading tools built into iOS forever. For a very, very long time. So if you're looking for some things to sort of get you started, and I'm sure Patrick will have some things around the pros from TextHelp to take things even further. But if you're looking to get started at a basic level, you know, just have a little dig into and think about what tools come baked in to the tools and platforms and devices that you have within your setting already, because you'll be very, very surprised about what's in there and what's available. You know, if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, it was nowhere near like it is these days. But you know, from Chrome OS to Windows to iOS to Mac OS, there are lots of things that are built in as standard that can be really, really helpful. So if you're looking for some basic advice, it would be to sort of dive into that, find the accessibility options that are inside your control panel or your settings app or whatever it is you've got access to, and dive into that and find out what's actually useful and relevant, again, because the context is different for every child, whether they've been highlighted as having additional needs or not, you know. So yeah, that would be my sort of feeling and best practice advice on that, Wolfgang.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Mark. That's great and good to hear. And I am going to jump over straight to Patrick because I know he's got lots of experience in this field.
I was just picking up on two things really Mark said there. That those, don't underestimate those small changes that we can make. Mark talked about things like using the right font, and that is like the one tiny change that people can do. Things like Lexend has now become a specifically designed dyslexic friendly font, has now mainstream, is available across all of the Google estate and Microsoft estate as a downloadable font. Really, really useful to do. Comic Sans if you can't get it, but also simple things like spacing better on the text as you write it out, just increasing that spacing a little bit and double space it helps go an awful long way. So those are practical things. And an additional, and I'm just leading up to this, if you take those two very basic things and you say, right, the next thing I'm going to do when I make a resource or create a document is I'm literally going to tag the title as a header rather than actually simply go, well, I'm actually going to make it size 18 font and bold it out. Those are very useful. And here's why. Those wonderful tools that Mark has talked about that are built in and baked into a lot of things. You know, who would have thought 10 years ago that my iPhone or my daughter's Samsung phone or the Chromebook that pupils use in school would have text to speech there? That ability to have content read out loud and so important. If you take from a practical standpoint, I always like to think about dyslexia in two ways, and it's not two separate ways. They're very interlocked and interrelated. But think about how ed tech can help. On the one side, there's the challenge of comprehension. So a student who lives with dyslexia, will struggle with comprehension as they read, because they are trying to decode the actual words on the page as well as understand it at the same time. And so if we can help them with that, that's going to help with comprehension. On the other side, to make it more readable, which is some of the things that Mark touched upon earlier, incredibly useful. And there are tools now that are built in that can take, let's say, a web page, can instantly remove the distractions and put it into a reader mode, pull away the adverts, get rid of the videos, increase the font size. They can change it to a dyslexic friendly font. It can also make sure that there's text to speech available. So that readability piece is really important, as well as then if you think about how that applies to comprehension, to have something like text to speech, whether it's from Read and Write, from Text Help, or from Claro software, or just inbuilt in learning tools or in iOS, that can really, really help support comprehension in a huge way. And most importantly for me, I think we got to realize when we talk about dyslexia, we'll all have worked with pupils that clearly have an IEP or an HCP statement, and they are clearly dyslexic. They have been assessed as such and have the label as such, as much as I want to move away from talking about labels. But if you look at statistics, we're estimating that maybe we have 5% in the UK of the school's population with dyslexia. But actually, when we look at it in a wider sense, you're talking about up to 17% of the entire population of the UK potentially have some form of dyslexia. If we do text to speech, or we change the font, as Mark said, or we use the iOS built-in reader, we can start to support a lot of pupils that are almost flying underneath the radar. They don't have a statement. They're not designated special education needs, but they're living with dyslexia in some shape, manner, or form, and they're struggling with it. My own wife is a physics teacher. She she's now 44 years of age. She'll kill me for announcing her age on live and online. But only 2 years ago was she actually diagnosed with having dyslexia. So she went through her entire teaching career as a teacher, not understanding why sometimes it was a struggle to read. She just didn't. Nobody ever thought to talk about it. The accommodations that Mark's talked about and help and support in advance is really, really powerful areas there. There's lots we can do. And in fact, one last thing. Mark talked about colored paper. Boogie's laughing at me because she knows I keep talking. Mark talked about colored paper. But edtech tools now, but many of you may well have worked in a situation where you've had to have that acetate sheet go over a screen just to help kind of overlay that. EdTech tools now, whether it's a Chrome extension or it's Read and Write or anything at all, can give pupils that full overlay. They can change it to their prescription. They can change it to a way that suits them. Really simple things, but massively powerful.
That's really, really useful. I think really like actual takeaways there that teachers listening or educators listening can actually use straight away. Patrick, I'm going to give you a quick question that was asked by April for just thinking about a little bit, because you're going to be talking again next, I think, for a little bit. But she's just asking if you've got any suggestions on how to help, or it goes to the whole panel actually, not just to you, but if you've got any suggestions on how to help students with speech impediments access speech to text. So how that would look. So maybe if the panel can just think about that a little bit, whilst we hear from Isla, and just how some of these tools work in your world.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating listening to Mark and Patrick, really. They've made some really good points and given some good tips, because it's not everyone that's diagnosed dyslexic that can benefit from these tools. And so therefore they're really useful to language learners, English language learners. So some of the tools that I make most use of with my learners in ESOL are things like, at our college we use Microsoft, so we use Immersive Reader, and like Patrick said, that's got all the colors. You can change the font size, you can put it into the font that you prefer to read from. I know that Comic Sans is really popular in school. As we go up in age range, some students can find that a little patronizing. So I like to use things like Century Gothic that still have that A, that's the proper A, not the wiggly one. I don't know what the proper term for that is, but it's much easier to read. Someone can help me out with that.
Well, let's stick with the wiggly A. I like that.
Yeah, it's from now on, it's going to be called the wiggly A. That's it. Never mind what it was called.
But yeah, immersive reader has been invaluable. One, because you can do all those adjustments to text, but also because it translates the text for learners and it speaks it aloud. While I'm speaking about dyslexia, when I was training staff last year, we were just talking about like the functions of Microsoft Word, and the fact that now you can just dictate into it. Like one of our like FE teachers works in public services, was blown away by this because it's, you know, has dyslexia, struggled with assignments, teacher training work, essay writing, was going on to do his masters, and was like, this is a game changer for me. Now I can get my ideas onto paper without the difficulty. And that's just another sort of little example of something small that can really make a huge difference.
Yeah, fantastic. And I was just thinking also, you know, I recently worked in China and started using it was actually Microsoft Translate, and we just took it to a bar with a friend whose partner was Chinese and didn't speak English, and my wife's Japanese, and we were sitting in the bar with Microsoft Translate on the listening. We actually created like a little group, and so everybody could speak their own language and actually get it translated and live. And he actually cried. He started crying because it was the first time he could be part of a conversation in a totally different language with very little misunderstanding. I mean, there's still some funny misunderstandings and translations, especially into Chinese and Japanese. But it was wonderful. It was really, really great to hear.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. So how can those particular pieces of software address the question that April asked? You know, students with impediments or students with an accent or, you know, non-standard, some kind of long non-standard language expressive language. Can those tools help with that?
Picking the tools. Well, Jeannie, there's in my experience, there's three sets of tools there, and Mark might be able to shed more light on this as well as Bookie perhaps as well. But if you take the traditional dictation tools, were tools that required a considerable amount of training. People had to sit down and train that. Those are the sort of the legacy, originally sort of very powerful Microsoft tools. Things have moved on quite a bit now, where the off-the-shelf Microsoft tools and the Apple tools and all of those tools. Think about Alexa and Siri and the things that we don't have to train anymore. Dictation has got a lot better. So yes, there's advice around speed, but also understanding what's right for the pupil, because some of those will allow for a lot more hesitations as a pupil speaks, and will actually accommodate for that as we go. And it is important to try a flavor of those that's suitable for a particular pupil, in my experience. And the other thing is, there may well be a case, depending on that particular pupil's specific circumstances, and moving to something that's not just inbuilt and not just there, and looking at something like Dragon that is built for purpose and can really, really support that. And I think you'll probably find that in situations like Boogie you've worked, you know, something like Dragon is an incredibly powerful tool there. But for me, make sure we don't have to train it. Encourage pupils to speak with a reasonable pace is important, and use a microphone in there is useful too. What I've never found, you all get now, I speak very fast and have a very thick Ireland accent. I have never found any of the online tools that have actually struggled with what I've had to say, which is quite remarkable if you think about it. And those tools are, in terms of accents, are very, very accommodating for that. But hesitations and particular challenges, I'd always look at something beyond that. And again, the rest of the panel will probably have more experience than me on that.
It was difficult to bite my tongue there and not say pardon. Okay.
Yeah, so, because switch on closed captions and see if actually what I'm saying makes sense there, guys.
Hey, not a bad idea. Yeah, it's actually that's something else I used in a previous school for live assemblies. I actually had live translating on the side, and that was pretty powerful as well. Thank you guys. Thanks a lot. And yeah, April. I mean, April just said thank you for the idea of Dragon, and I personally worked with Dragon a lot with a student who had multiple disabilities back in Zurich, and it really changed his life in terms of being able to participate and be part of sort of the more mainstream element of the school. Bucky, we haven't really heard that much from you yet, and yet there you are. And I'd love to know a little bit more about an area I know very little about, and that is dysgraphia. And I don't think that many of us, well, I'm presuming, know actually what it is. And so could you let us know a little bit more about what it is and how edtech has helped in that area?
Yeah, no, thanks, Wolfgang. So dysgraphia basically is having difficulties with writing, and it could be, you know, in terms of legibility, or maybe with issues in terms of fine motor skills. And this, ironically, is something that I'm more familiar with, even with within a mainstream context. And I think, I mean, there are two aspects that I've actually seen as tech helping with this. The first one is one that I would automatically go to, which is the speech to text. And it actually, you know, like some of the issues that have been raised in terms of maybe some of the words that come out incorrectly and things like that. I think the more you use it, particularly more recently, it gets better in that regard. However, now when I did some research in readiness for the webinar, one thing that was really important, and I thought, of course, you can't always use speech to text context. Text software and applications in every particular context. So, for example, within a classroom setting, if a child wants to use it, they may not be able to use it with 30 other kids, you know, working around, even if it's fairly quiet. They may have to be taken to another setting. So that automatically eliminates them from the class setting. So the other aspect is actually using, say, like keyboards and things like that. Any device that's got a keyboard, you know, like a physical keyboard works. Now, again, you find, I mean, for example, I work in secondary settings. So by the time the young people, you know, I meet young people, the earliest age they will be 11. And there's some research out there that says it's too late. And one of the things they say is an issue is the fact that with parents and educators particularly, they leave it too late to actually apply tech and finding, you know, exploring different ways. And what I've been reading says about if you're trying to look at getting young people to improve their writing using, say, like typical pen or pencil for a period of 12 to 18 months, and you don't really see a significant change, you need to look at assistive technology and find a different solution. And they say in order to make the most impact, the young people should be around about age 8 and 9. And as I say, I meet them at age 11, and most of them only start to get access to assistive technology when they start in preparation for their exams, their GCSEs. In the UK, we're talking about young people who are aged at least 14, going to 16. So they need to get used to new technology. Some young people do find it embarrassing that everyone else is around them using, say, for example, traditional pen and paper, and they're using the device. And I think that the school culture should actually help in actually getting adults to model this as great practice and normalize that. I think also in addition is the assumption about the fact that young people's keyboarding skills are excellent. And I've seen young people who may be like nifty on the, you know, when it comes to, say, like using a mobile phone, their thumbs are twiddling, but it's like chopsticks when it comes to using a keyboard. So we need to make sure that we provide them with the skills to type in a way that's quickly enough. And it doesn't have to be in terms of touch typing. There is a phrase that I came across called adaptive keyboarding. And this basically means that you give the young people a way of getting their words out using the keyboard as quickly as possible. And even young children can actually do this as well. So I think when it comes to this particular area, dysgraphia, we have automatic assumptions. I'm not SEND, I'm not neurodiverse, and I would make assumptions about what I think actually would work. But we need to make sure that we are educated, we know the research. And I think even putting adults, I'm one of experiential learning, and I think we make assumptions about what it would be, what could help. We need to make sure that we understand and try it out ourselves, but look at a combination of different things that actually help the young person to move forward and have what I've seen as called as an Assistive Technology Implementation Plan, where the different tools, it could be applications, it could be software, come together. And it's shared with all the staff that we're teaching the young children concerned, so they understand what is being used in terms of the tech, and they understand why it's being used, and they understand, more importantly, how it will be implemented within their lessons.
That's fantastic, Vicky. And I've got to say, I mean, my background is predominantly in international school education and schools. And there, for the most part, we normally have what's called like independent learning plans or independent learning paths for students. But very often, sort of the references to tools, for example, there's strategies that are often referenced, but tools and edtech is predominantly never mentioned.
Exactly.
And you're right, like that. How powerful would that be to say at a staff workshop, you know, where we've got PD days where you can work through some of those because they're applicable across the board. They're not just applicable to individual students, but it's teaching tools and strategies, right? Which brings me over to Patrick, because I think you've got a bit to add about this topic as well.
Well, I was just going to pick up on something Bookie said there, which was in the UK, you know, there's a case for traditionally there's been a case for a human scribe within an exam. So a person to sit there and write the answers in an exam environment. And I think, you know, we probably don't want to mention the big pandemic word as we go through today, but over the last couple of years, the advice has sort of changed there, and that's become a lot more digitally orientated. And really what that means is a pupil now, we're talking about a 16-year-old pupil though at this stage, and it comes back to Bookie's point, it might be their first experience of using speech to text in an exam environment, are expected to use this straight away in an exam environment to answer exam questions. And our legislation in the UK says you actually need to have this as your normal way of working. This should be the way they use across the entire year. And how many actually students have experienced that? And it's a crying shame for me that I can watch my 4-year-old niece use any of that technology, whether it's Alexa or Siri, or they use it as part of their daily life, but yet they get into school, and if they needed it, they don't have it. So I support fully what Boogie said there, but I would also add to that there are many ed tech tools that can help with the very sort of nature of dysgraphia, the challenge of transcription. You know, the pupils have the thoughts in their head. This is not a problem cognitively. This is a problem with simply getting it down on paper. So if we think about how we might use voice in that, you know, we've got things like extensions, and Mark, you'll know this and you know it well, people like Moat, who will rely on voice and have voice transcription in there. We've got other ways that pupils can use the same tools, and we have it in Read and Write as well, the same tools that allow pupils to make their own audio notes rather than have to write down a note. They can record a quick audio note, but they've also got these things on their phones. These can help reduce the anxiety around dysgraphia and start to help us towards a normal way of working. For me, that's what it has to be about here. This is a normal way of working. It's not anything different. This is just a tool you use, and you use inside school and you use outside school. You'll use in exams and outside exams, and this is what helps.
And so just really quickly to understand, I mean, that there's you've talked about a lot of more on the software side of things on the back end. In terms of hardware, is there stuff that you've come across that would be specifically helpful there too?
No, in fact, I would just support what Boogie said earlier, which is, you know, good contact keyboards. And this will depend on the student, because you'll have a student here who has a mobility or a coordination challenge with that, and that'll be part of the process. But it may be to do with literally holding a pen. And I think it's not fair to say that for those pupils who have been assessed with this, that there's kind of a magic bullet here. There's a one size fits all. It is a case of this may be a keyboard tool, this may be a switch tool, this may be maybe a Wacom tablet device for just writing with a different size pen. It may still be a pen and paper thing. There are many different areas here, but I think we we have to try what's right and assess very carefully what the individual student needs are in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the assessment piece is and the ongoing assessment also, not that it's like a single assessment and then that's it, but also continuously supporting those students in that way.
We have to be conscious that our main goal here in that case is to reduce anxiety and increase confidence as much as possible. I mean, and whatever we can do to do that through whatever tool is the right tool in my book.
Absolutely.
Sweeping statement, I know, but it is true.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so Jeannie, I mean, you've got a lot of first-hand experience of how that looks, both from an administrative point of view, but also from a teaching point of view. Anything to add on that front of the sort of support mechanisms that we've talked about?
Yeah, just listening to the conversation so far, there's some themes here I think that are worth mentioning, and it's really we're talking about universal access. So what works for one student may work for a lot of students in the classroom. So I think just using technology as a tool, an everyday tool, just like a pencil, is it benefits so many different kinds of learners. And, everything is so very individualized. I think it's important to keep that in mind. And something that's been brought up a couple of times is really trial and error. Like, yes, some things are going to work for most students, but some students are going to need something that's very specific. And what I found is that I've been able to work with amazing, dedicated, committed teachers and parents who continue to search and search and search until they find something that works. And then maybe that doesn't last. And so they go back at it. So the other part I think that's important to bring in here is passion. We want to have a passion for reaching students. So I'm not talking about, the software and the hardware, but really like how that the personal touch that we have as teachers and educators and parents to work to bring our students into their learning environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all agree that technology is, of course, a massive enabler and it can assist in so many different ways, but it shouldn't start with a conversation about what technology is best here and what technology exists. But that's really the end of that whole conversation and planning piece, isn't it? And so, Isla, like in your world again, I'd love to get some more specifics about how does it work for non-English native speakers and the support that can be offered there.
Well, I mean, I'd never heard of dysgraphia before. I'd sort of seen it in the notes for today, and I started doing a bit of research, and I thought it sounds, very similar in some ways to those ESOL students we call pre-entry or pre-literate. So you've got learners that have never learned to read or write in their own language. So all of these tools could be useful for learners like that will take longer to read and write because they didn't have the schooling or they didn't have the access to education in their, in the country that they were born in. There's just so much overlap. It's so fascinating. It's so interesting. And I think the key is it's the individual student that you focus on first, and what do they like, what do they need, and then go from there rather than applying the technology to everybody and playing with things. I think people feel nervous about using these things, but you've got to be free to play. I loved the idea about having a training day where teachers get to explore the different tools and see how they feel. That's really important.
It really is, yeah. And I think there's a sort of comment that was made by the Prince of Wales School that ties in quite nicely into what we've just said about that technology. And basically, I like that comparison to electricity in the classroom. Has to always be there, has to be working, and just easily accessible. And whether it's for ESOL students, whether it's for SEND, the SEND students that we've talked about so far, that's so important that it doesn't get in the way, and it isn't this extra thing that people have to learn. Of course, there's got to be some professional development involved, but ultimately, I think that's a very good comparison there.
Wolfgang, just if I can pick up on that, just very
Absolutely.
quickly. People say to me, right, Patrick, what's your one piece of advice? What's the one thing you tell me to do? And actually, the one thing comes back to that question from the school there, which is we need to give pupils and students the opportunity to use technology. We can go and we can talk about our shopping lists of edtech all day long, and we can talk about good practice all day long. But if our classroom practitioners are not actually turning that opportunity over to the pupils to actually use it when it really matters, then all this is for naught. So that give students the opportunity to use these tools, I think, is just the essential core piece of advice. And that question was absolutely bang on. It needs to be there and on tap, and there needs to be the freedom and flexibility to use it. That's how we get our pupils supported better as they go forward. They'll pick what's right for them as they go.
Yeah,
I think part of it as well, Patrick. Sorry, Wolfgang. I think part of it links into one of those images that you shared as well, Patrick, in readiness for today. I'll just share it with you now. Necessary for some, useful for all. It's about making sure that And a picture says 1,000 words, doesn't it? But you know what Mr. S has shared from Prince of Wales School there, and what you're sharing too, Patrick, it's about making sure you've got it there in place for other people when they need it, when it's right for them, and that's good tech, full stop, isn't it? It's not about using tech all the time. And we in our private chat, we've been talking a little bit, saying, you know, people first, technology second, and sort of reinforcing what Wolfgang was sharing a moment ago. But yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And it's not about technology taking over absolutely everything, but it's knowing, again, like with the TPAT model, it's about knowing when right to or not to use the technology. And I guess this ties in with teacher training. It was interesting hearing Isla share about a moment ago, for example, about not really knowing much about dysgraphia, which you know, dyslexia gets a lot of the headlines, doesn't it? People talk an awful lot about dyslexia, but dysgraphia doesn't come into many teachers' vernacular. I can see Bookie going there. I was wondering what, if anyone, I mean, I'm not writing the questions right now, but just wondering, you know, why people think that might be the case. Why isn't dysgraphia and dyscalculia sort of talked about more, like this dyslexia is? What's your thoughts on that, Patrick?
Well, you know, one of the things that I find just really, really overwhelming is when you start to look at some of the statistics about the underlying, the invisible things that are there. And dyscalculia, probably, Mark, is a good one. You know, there was a study here. It just coincidentally, it was in Northern Ireland. It was nothing to do with me or us. It's just the local university undertook an academic study 4 years ago now. And 4 years ago, they took 2,500 students, pupils at primary level, and they wanted to assess them for dyscalculia, standard metrics. Out of those 2,500 pupils, one had already got an assessment and had a plan in place to support their dyscalculia. When all 2,500 were actually assessed, there was 112 of those pupils actually met the criteria. Now, that is quite, and it's now quite a famous study about these underlying issues that are there that pupils are living with on a daily basis, and they're having to build coping strategies for. So I think things like dyscalculia get a little bit sort of parked to the side, and because dyslexia is so in your face. But did you know in dyslexia, like 75% of dyslexic student actually struggles with maths as well? But we don't really recognize that because we think, oh, it's all about literacy and it's all about reading. It's all about the words on the page. Actually, it's about a whole lot more. So we need to be looking at these things better and building better mechanisms globally to kind of realize that. And I think we can, Mark, we can do that if we start to look at inclusion slightly differently and actually go, look, let's assume, and the word always says never assume, but let's assume that every single one of your pupils is different. And let's assume every single one of your pupils has a particular struggle. What can we do from a technology standpoint that gives them tools that might help them overcome that? Because we're never going to find out about all of the pupils with dysgraphia or dyscalculia or dyslexia in our classes. We just can't. The mechanisms aren't there to do it. So it'd be brilliant to raise the four, but I think the path to that is making a decision to be more inclusive in how we apply these tools and strategies. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I agree. And I think it ties quite nicely into something that I wanted you to talk about, Bookie, is in terms of the difficulty of inclusion, right? It can be really, really difficult, either due to physical or non-physical reasons. But what approaches can educators take to ensure that inclusion, as we've just heard from Patrick, does get to the learners?
Training. First and foremost, effective training. You know, there are so many different things. I mean, this is like there's no one size fits all, but I think it's better understanding, better training, and the inclusive nature of the culture of the school. So let me give you an example of just share an anecdote. I do master classes for an organization, which means I teach science up and down the country. And there was one particular class that I've actually taught a number of occasions in which there was one young person who shared that they were deaf. They couldn't actually hear me. So I didn't know. I wasn't given any facilities or any resources to actually use to help them, apart from making sure they were sat close to me. And I was trying to make sure that they could actually be, but obviously walking around the classroom, it's impossible to do that. The next time I saw them, they handed me something. They said, "Miss," gave me something, and I just looked at it because I thought, what is this? This is a mobile with a lanyard. And they just indicated, no, put it on. When you speak, I can hear everything, no matter where you are in the classroom. And I thought, wow, that's really powerful. But nobody told me that. No, not one member of the school. It's not a criticism. I think, and that's what I'm talking about. You know, it's the inclusive aspects of the fact that it goes back to what you said, Patrick, in the fact that it's looking at how do we make inclusion better. And I think avoiding it being bolt on, it's got to be part of the DNA of what the school is trying to achieve and part of their improvement plan. So so as I say, that particular anecdote I shared because I just thought I wondered how many times is this young person in lessons not really able to engage? They're very able, but not being able to engage because of the fact that maybe everyone that actually comes into contact with them isn't aware about the the tech that they could actually use just to make just one thing easier for them to actually engage with. So,
yeah, it's funny, Boogie. I was on a totally support that. I was on a panel earlier on this morning. I think people think I spend my day on panels. I don't. It just so happens to be today. But the chair of the panel there said, right, Patrick, let me give you a scenario. You come back in 2 years' time. What do you want to talk about? And I said, actually, I'll tell you what I don't want to talk about, which is inclusive practice. And she looked kind of quite taken aback. But the point is that if I had a dream about what I would want to achieve with all the things that I do, and I'm sure it's shared with many others here, is that actually we don't have to talk about inclusive practice because inclusive practice is the norm, and we just talk about good practice, and it has inclusion built in. And I think that's where we need to get to. And that training piece that Mark, I know you touched upon and Book you touched upon, I think is very important. But we have to be careful with the training piece too, that what we're not doing. There's a line out there that I think we've all used, at least I have from time to time. Let's make every teacher a SEND teacher. And I think that is very positive, but also it's very scary for a lot of mainstream teachers because they're like, well, how am I ever going to get that specialism? But I think what we're really saying is we need to make them aware of these edtech tools that everybody has talked about on today. We need to make aware of the small changes in the habits that they can make, like as Mark said earlier, just changing the font size or changing spacing or using Mote to record. These are tiny things, but they really add up to inclusion in a very, very general way in the classroom. And I think that's what we've got to have. I love the line that diversity in our classrooms is a fact. Everybody's different, but inclusion is a choice, and inclusion is a choice. We've got to get the culture, as Bookie said, in place to make sure everybody recognizes that in our schools and actually gets on the bus with us. And in 2 years' time, we'll not be talking about inclusive education. I hope so.
No, I agree. Yeah, no, and Bookie's going to share a point right here as well.
Can I make a point? And Mark, I shared this with you years ago. I think when you interviewed me for something, if I was education secretary, what would I ask teachers to do? I think every teacher needs to, as part of the training, they need to work in a special school or they need to work within alternative provision because you can see firsthand about some of the learning needs that young people have. I didn't understand some of the learning needs, like, for example, some of my students said that they had dyspraxia. I had to ask him. I know it's in the EHCP. I had never heard of dyspraxia before in my life. So I asked this young person, what does this mean? What does it mean that you're able to do? What can you not do? And more importantly, what should I have you do to help you? So when they explained it, so I think that, that sometimes there are assumptions made, but having your training within a special school setting or alternative provision where, you can see emotional and mental health needs and how they impact sometimes upon the learning of the young person as well. It will be a really wise way to experience these things firsthand and have it at the forefront of your mind rather than a bolt-on. I really dislike the bolt-on approach because it's never going to fit. And I think sometimes it shows maybe maybe the young people not seem as equal as others, whereas what it should be is part of the norm. It's part of what we normally do, and it's well considered and well thought out.
Boogie, you think about a building now. A building now has ramps built in. A building now has light switches at the right level. A building now, and I could go on in a list. And these are rules, and these are a way that people follow now, and they're just the norm. That's just what we do. We don't do anything different. We make wider doors. We do all of the things that are needed in place, but actually, yet we don't do that. And I think we're still in a land of accommodations and bolt-ons afterwards. And I know we're all kind of fighting a good fight to get away from that, but I think that's a really important point you make.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I think, Jeannie, you want to jump in and add
I
a bit
do.
to this as well.
I do. There's so much I want to. There's so many things I want to comment on. But just to get back to what Buki said about the device on the lanyard that was handed to you. It's an FM system, right? And so a teacher wears it, and they're sending, and the student is receiving. However, you can also mount them in ceilings, and so it can be used in the classroom for all learners. And we found that it really helps with students who perhaps have some kind of focus issues, or students who maybe have or sensory overload, so that they're able to then focus more on the instruction, get rid of the background noises and focus on the instruction given by the teacher, or in their small group if they're working in projects. So that's a great piece of hardware that actually I hadn't thought about till you brought that up. So that's good.
Jeannie, also just to add to that, I worked at a school where we installed one of them in the theater.
Yeah.
So we could actually have musicals and other types of performances with the students still being able to participate. So it was fantastic.
Yeah.
They're really powerful system. Sorry,
it
John.
is. It is. Yeah. But I also wanted to I guess that what came to mind to me was a little bit of this zone of wishful thinking, this idea that we can just try a lot of things, or have teachers explore a lot of things, and kind of get wrapped up in the fun of technology, and not really necessarily finding the right technology. So I think it's important that as we're doing training, and as we are exposing teachers and parents and students to the wonderful things there, the wonderful array of things that are available, that we kind of have to bring into the conversation that just because you're using technology doesn't mean it's going to work. Just because, right? So I mean, that was another thing that came in. But then, Buki, I think you also talked about in the inclusive nature of school, and that I used to think that every teacher should be trained around to be a special education teacher, or whatever term we're going to use, until I started meeting teachers who weren't trained in special education, but were able to do incredible teaching and learn, with students who had very significant learning needs. So I think it brought me to this. It is about a mindset. It's about a willingness to try. It's about communication and building partnerships. So that was just another comment that I wanted to make.
Brilliant. No, I think absolutely true. Anything further on this point from anyone? I love the fact that this is such an engaged panel. First of all, it's wonderful. Okay, so then moving on a little bit in terms of what we've just heard from the panel. I would say maybe let's talk a little bit about what sorts of tools and apps feature of operating systems and additional hardware would you recommend? I know we've talked about that not being the forefront, but is there anything that still sticks up? We just talked about the FM system. Is there anything else that that we think is worth mentioning? Good. We've talked about tech. That's excellent. No, I love it. I love it. Another question that we often ask is about the additional types of information, books, blogs, authors, people that are out there that aren't on this panel. I know that's difficult to believe, but who's out there? What's out there that can help our audience stay abreast of developments and get some hands-on information? Hopefully there's teachers on here listening to this thinking, you know what, I'm going to go back to school, or maybe administrators, and say we need to be doing much more and acting, right? So just jump in, I would say, and maybe recommend some things there.
I've got one, if that's all right, very, very quickly, because obviously he's quite shy and reserved and doesn't like to talk. So what I would like to do is just do a shout out for Text Help, because Text Help actually, and again, I'm not on the payroll or any of that sort of stuff in the slightest, right? But I see that the output that the team at Text Help put out there, not just resources, but webinars similar to what we're doing here, roundtables, they support events, they do an awful lot for the education community. obviously they're a business and need to make money and sell their products and all the rest of it, but they don't have to do all the extra stuff to be really valued and trusted voices within the education sector, but they do. And so please, not only check out their products because they're world class and really, really good, with children right at the heart of what they're trying to do with them. But yeah, follow them on Twitter and follow Patrick if you can put up with the Guinness references and that sort of thing. But yeah, follow TextHelp. They share an awful lot of good stuff. And equally, Microsoft, as I mentioned, Apple don't sing and shout much about their accessibility stuff, but follow Mike Tholfsen on Twitter. He's a great advocate and he's a product manager at Microsoft. But he's a real champion for inclusion and equity and accessibility within the sort of Microsoft ecosystem, heavily involved in things like their Read in Progress tool and Immersive Reader and so forth and so on. And he's always sharing top tips for inclusion and engagement and all those sort of things too. So yeah, follow TextHelp and follow M. Tholfsen. I'll drop it in the YouTube chat in a second so you can follow that and what have you. But there'll be my sort of two starters for 10, Wolfgang.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm loving it. I know you guys can't see this, but in the private chat, we've got people lining up and ready to go, chomping at the bits, wanting to add. So go for it, Bucky.
Remembering to unmute this time. Okay, so the first person I'd recommend is Hexaminto. I'm actually looking at it because he's got such a long title. So he's an assistive technologist and really helped me to up my game, I have to say, a few years ago when I came across him and what he does. He's also a disability inclusion advocate, lead evangelist for accessibility at Microsoft, UK Government Disability and Access Ambassador for Tech and Web. So a lot of that. Really practical and insightful guy, I have to say. Also, Nathan. Nathan's my go-to, but Nathan had recently completed actually a 2 to 3 month assistive technology training pilot with the DFE and Microlink, and they worked with assistive technology champions within schools. I think about 25 secondary schools, about 45 primary schools, and they're going to be sharing their publications. So they've got a lot of information, training, insights that they actually share on their website, and you can actually sign up for free and access them. So those two.
That's fabulous, thank you. And I know, Isla, you're next. You've also got some great things to share.
Yeah, I do. Because when I was sort of preparing for this, I thought I'm just going to put everything in a wakelet so that I remember to mention things. And some of the things that I found, so I can share the link with you guys later, and maybe we could combine our list because I hadn't heard of Buki's recommendations before. But I would really recommend a podcast, Universal Learning with Saj Mohammed. He's done a series of interviews with neurodiverse learners and education facilitators and supporters. And they're brilliant podcasts which really sort of open your mind to how we can support people better. Also, it's one of like the only podcasts I know of that provides a full transcript for the podcast on the website that he hosts them on. So that's Universal Learning. The other thing I found as I was sort of researching was Include Edu, which is like a website where you can sort of look at the differences or the needs of your learners, and it will take you to a list of suggestions of websites and tools that you can use to help your students. So I really love that. And I just found some really great resources on the ETF website under Send and technology. There's lots there about accessibility and different training that you can access. So those are the sort of 3 things I wanted to mention.
That's fantastic. No, I think that's I always love at the end when we get some hands-on actual recommendation that the listeners and viewers can take away, and then, as I said, hopefully apply straight away. Jeannie, you've come on.
Yeah.
I would love to hear from you too.
Yeah, so I don't have any other recommendations of books or blogs or podcasts, but I do want to say that networking with other educators is incredibly important and valuable. Finding other people who are as passionate as you are, SENIA, the Special Education Network and Inclusion Association, is a great resource for that. But also it could be your occupational therapist that you know, or your physical therapist, or your speech and language pathologist. So I just think there's a value in doing that as well, as you're seeking to expand your access and knowledge. Just wanted to add the people part again.
No, absolutely. And I think we seem to forget about that a little bit too quickly sometimes. All right. Is there anything else, Patrick? Paddy, I just heard you breathe in.
Yeah,
Was there something you wanted to add?
Breathing in and snoring. Oh, have I been snoring? Really? Sorry, Wolfgang.
No, it nearly sounded like you wanted to add something.
If you don't mind, I'm going to join in the Ryan Evans fan club at this point as well, because Ryan is somebody that I always want to give a shout out. His project is fabulous, includedu.online, if I'm not incorrect, but you certainly Google that. And that's a fabulous directory of resources and courses that can really start to drill into specific needs. It's a really, really, really good tool. So nice one, Ryan, on that. But two last things. One is cast.org. We didn't really cover it today, but Universal Design for Learning is a fabulous framework when we're starting to look at how can we be more inclusive in our original and initial design for learning approaches. Cast.org is a really good way to learn a little bit more about that, and it's very accessible in itself. And for me, the last thing is just there's a series of 6 videos that I'm sure we could put a link to, Inclusive Ed Bootcamp, that we actually ran a while ago. None of it sells you anything. There's people like Professor Amanda Kirby on there talking about neurodiversity. There's a British Dyslexia Association made it by dyslexia. There's lots of people there. It's nothing to do with textile products whatsoever. So it's not a pitch. It is genuinely 6 really, really good. Well, I should say 5 really good speakers plus me. There's 6 videos, so there's 5 really good speakers and me, and you can get access to that online. So we'll put that maybe in the notes of this episode. It's really, really brilliant speakers all around inclusion.
Fantastic. And we've just had Ryan, by the way, who's watching, who says thanks all. He's very appreciative of our comments. And that actually brings us, believe it or not, to the end. Sadly enough, we've managed to squeeze an hour into 10 minutes somehow. It feels like we really didn't even get through half of what we could have done. But I think it just shows how passionate our panelists are about the topic, how wonderfully knowledgeable you guys are all, and just the experience you bring. So first of all, thank you very much for joining me for this hour. It's been a real pleasure, and I know that some of you are coming to bed. I just wanted to quickly take that opportunity, first of all, to say Mark and I, Patrick, I know you'll be there as well. Bookie, I think you're going to be there. Isla, maybe we can still sort of convince you to, and Jeannie, I don't know if you'll take the trip from France, maybe not, but if you want to continue the conversation, I know that a lot of people will be there. Certainly, we will be. Reach out to us and just book some time and have a coffee with us or a drink at the end of it. Be great to see you guys. So before we leave, as per every episode, we've got a few little giveaways. We as a company, i3, have got I think a fantastic product with the IMO Learns, which are sort of big learning cubes that can be used digitally. But as we discussed today a lot, their main usage, I think, is actually not necessarily digitally. They're fantastic seats in all kinds of positions. The activity material that or building blocks that you can use with activity builders. And so one lucky winner will get a set of that. And then Patrick, maybe you can talk quickly about the 2 giveaways you giving away and why.
I think one is a Chromebook in conjunction with the friends at Acer. So it's a 13-inch Chromebook. And the second thing is a Google Mini Nest. So we're giving both of those away. Just because, Wolfgang, there's no particular reason behind that, but just because we're nice people at Text Help and we like to give away nice things. And I think those are things that have practical applications inside and outside of the classroom.
Fully agree, and I second that. Very nice people. It's absolutely true. Okay, so this is it for another episode, and we'll see each other again in April. And the date is April 21st, another Thursday, for our next episode. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good morning, evening, or afternoon, in that order maybe. Thank you.